This channel's for people who don't scare easy. If that's you, hit subscribe, turn the lights down, and get comfortable. What you're about to hear might follow you to sleep. A truck sits outside an abandoned motel, engine still running, but the driver is nowhere to be found. Claw marks streak the side of a livestock hauler deep in the Ozark woods. Out on America's highways, legends come to life after dark. Phantom brides drifting through the fog, ghost convoys swallowed by the desert, spirits that steal shadows and leave no trace but chilling evidence behind. These aren't just stories. They're real encounters that hint at something unfinished, tied to tragedies and secrets that linger on the open road. Tonight, we follow 10 true accounts from truckers who crossed paths with the unexplained. Stay with us as we uncover the hidden history behind each mile. A history that refuses to be forgotten, even in the loneliest places. They call it the loneliest road in America, but Highway 50 in Nevada is more than just empty. The landscape presses in, mile after mile, until the silence feels like something you could reach out and touch. Some say the isolation lets old stories breathe. Others claim the road itself holds on to memories. For Calvin Mercer, a trucker with years of long-haul experience, September 2018 brought those memories uncomfortably close. That night, Calvin was making his usual run toward Ely as a sandstorm rolled across the basin. The wind and dust made it almost impossible to see, but he kept pace with 3 other trucks in his convoy, their taillights flickering in and out of the swirling grit. The CB radio carried their voices, sometimes joking about Highway 50's reputation for strange happenings. Calvin had heard the old story from Ely locals, a military supply convoy that vanished without a trace in a 1943 storm, swallowed up by the same road. He chalked it up to diner talk, the kind of thing that fills the long hours. About an hour into the storm, everything changed. The other truck's lights faded until they were gone. Calvin thought he'd slipped ahead, but when he called out over the CB, he got no answer. Instead, the radio filled with a pattern he recognized from his army upbringing. Morse code, slow and shaky, as if someone was trying to send a message but couldn't quite get it out. Calvin didn't know what the message said, but the rhythm was unmistakable, and it felt desperate in a way that static never does. He focused on the road, knuckles tight on the wheel, when he caught the glare of headlights in his mirrors. They were too close and too bright, but when he looked again, they were gone. The silence that followed pressed in hard, broken only by a thin whine of static and a laugh that barely sounded human. Calvin wasn't easily rattled, but he felt something old and cold settle in his chest. The next morning, Calvin's rig was found parked on the shoulder near the highway's edge, doors locked from the inside, cab untouched. No sign of a struggle. No sign of Calvin. The details matched what people in Ely still whispered about the missing Watu convoy. Trucks found abandoned, drivers gone, nothing left but the echo of their passing. Some truckers say the road collects the lost, that now and then, ghostly headlights drift through the dust, looking for someone to follow them into the dark. Stories like Calvin's keep truckers alert, especially on those stretches where the road seems to have a memory. But not every haunting leaves behind only the missing. Sometimes, what's left behind is even stranger, like a shadow that doesn't belong to you, or a roadside stand that's not there when you look back. Denise Harper knew the monotony of Route 66 well, especially the long, sun-bleached stretch outside Peach Springs, Arizona. In July 2020, the heat pressed down on her cab as she hauled crates of peaches west. The air shimmered above the faded blacktop, and the old cooling system barely kept up. When a roadside stand appeared beneath a tangle of gnarled trees, Denise decided to pull over. She wanted a quick break, maybe a moment in the shade. Locals called the spirit that haunted these orchards the orchard shade, but Denise had never given the stories much thought. The stand itself looked simple. A rickety table beneath an ancient tree, branches twisted low. A basket of peaches sat in the deepest shade, their golden skins almost glowing. Denise stepped out, calling a greeting, but the only answer was the hum of insects. She moved closer, drawn to the fruit's unnatural perfection. That's when she saw the little girl in a white dress standing perfectly still in the shadow beneath the tree. The child lifted her hand in a slow wave. Denise blinked, and the girl was gone. The orchard felt colder, as if the world had slipped out of summer for a moment. Denise turned back toward her truck, but something was wrong. There should have been a shadow stretching from her boots, or at least the familiar outline of her rig, but the sun cast nothing at all. Denise's pulse picked up. She stepped forward, then back, searching for any trace of herself on the pavement. The emptiness where her shadow should have been unsettled her more than anything she'd seen so far. She hurried into the cab, shutting the door hard. The air inside was icy, far colder than the struggling AC could explain. Denise glanced at her lucky rabbit's foot. Its tan fur had turned a slick, unnatural black. The radio slowed to a crawl, voices and music dragging as if underwater. She gripped the wheel, trying to shake off the chill, but the world outside seemed to twist. The road ahead stretched on, but when she tried to drive away, the same stand kept reappearing. Each time, the crooked trees and the basket of peaches waited just ahead, as if she'd never left. Denise tried again and again to break free, but the loop held her. The peaches in her trailer, once perfect, shriveled and rotted in minutes, filling the cab with a thick, moldy sweetness. Her own shadow, when it finally reappeared, was wrong, long and thin, its edges reaching back toward the orchard. Denise pressed on the gas, but the world stayed the same. Days later, searchers found her truck parked near the orchard. The cab was locked tight and cold as a winter morning. All around, fresh peach pits littered the ground, and the faint prints of a child's bare feet circled the vehicle before fading into the trees. Denise was gone. Some say the orchard shade steals shadows to escape the sun, and truckers who lose theirs vanish before dusk. Locals warn travelers to avoid that stretch of Route 66, especially when the afternoon light grows thin and the trees begin to whisper. But not every haunting waits for darkness or the cover of trees. Sometimes the strangest encounters unfold on open water, in the thickest fog, where the line between the living and the lost is as thin as a veil. The Chesapeake Bay Bridge Tunnel is an 18-mile causeway that links Virginia Beach and Cape Charles, a stretch of concrete and steel often swallowed by fog, thick enough to erase the world outside your windshield. For fuel tanker driver Tommy Reed, one night in October 2021, turned that crossing into something he could never explain. The bridge tunnel is known for its dangerous weather and history of accidents, but it's the stories of what waits in the mist that keep drivers uneasy, especially the legend of the fog-bound bride. Tommy had made that crossing enough times to know its every curve and dip, but that night, the fog pressed so close he could barely see the guardrails on either side. The world shrank to the reach of his headlights, and the hum of his engine was the only sound. He'd turned his radio off before boarding, hoping for quiet. Then, as he eased onto one of the bridge's long, empty spans, he caught movement ahead, a pale figure standing in the center of his lane. At first, Tommy thought it was debris, or an animal, maybe a trick of the light. He braked hard, the tanker's frame shuddering. The figure resolved into the shape of a woman, her wedding dress soaked and clinging to her frame, the veil over her face shifting even though the air was still. He called out, but she didn't answer. She stood motionless, her dress trailing into the fog, and then, as quickly as she'd appeared, she was gone. Tommy tried to shake it off, but the unease grew sharper. As he pressed on, a melody drifted from his speakers, a slow, mournful love song, the kind that feels older than memory. He hadn't touched the radio. The floral scent of roses filled the cab, thick and sweet, impossible to ignore. The bridge seemed to stretch on forever, the fog never breaking. He glanced at his dashboard. The fuel gauge, steady just moments before, now dropped rapidly, the needle sinking toward empty as if something unseen was draining the tank. By the time Tommy reached the end of the bridge tunnel, alarms flashed on his dash, warning that he was running on fumes. He pulled over, hands shaking, and sat in silence. Then he saw it. A single white rose, pristine and out of place, resting on the dashboard where nothing had been before. Locals say the fog-bound bride is the spirit of a woman left waiting at the altar, doomed to wander the bridge searching for her lost groom. Drivers who see her sometimes lose hours, waking on the other side with no memory of the crossing and their tanks empty. Tommy never crossed the bridge at night again. He told friends he'd rather take the long way than risk meeting her twice. Stories like Tommy's remind drivers that some roads hold on to their tragedies, and that not every haunting is content to stay in memory. There are places where the land itself seems to watch, waiting for the next traveler to pass through. The Ozark National Forest holds stories that stick with those who pass through, and none is more unsettling than the legend of the red-eyed watcher. Locals warn that the forest demands respect, and that something in the shadows watches for those who forget. For Samuel Brooks, a livestock hauler with a deep respect for the land, one night in May 2023 turned those warnings into a reality he couldn't outrun. It was just after 11:11 p.m. when Sam steered his rig down a narrow, winding back road. The moonless sky pressed black against the treetops, and his headlights barely reached past the dense undergrowth. The road was empty, silent except for the low rumble of his engine. Sam had made this drive enough times to know the rhythm of the forest at night, but on this stretch, something felt off. The air grew heavy, and the usual chorus of insects and frogs faded until only the sound of his tires remained. That's when the cattle in his trailer erupted. The animals stampeded, their lowing echoing like a warning call, hooves slamming against the metal walls as if trying to escape. Sam checked his mirrors, searching for the cause. That's when he saw them, two red eyes, burning in the darkness just beyond the tree line, set far higher than any deer or coyote. They glowed, not reflecting, but casting their own faint light across the brush. Sam's breath caught. He slowed, torn between speeding up and trying to see what was out there. The eyes blinked, and a massive figure stepped from the trees, taller than any man, its outline blurred and shifting, crowned with twisted antlers that scraped the low branches. The shape seemed to gather the darkness around it, its edges never quite holding still. Sam slammed the accelerator, but the watcher moved with him, keeping pace with the truck as if the road itself bent to let it follow. The asphalt groaned under the weight of something heavy and unseen. Then guttural growls started to pour from his radio, deep, wet sounds that made the cab vibrate. No matter how much Sam turned the dials, the noise only grew. His dash cam flickered, the screen stuttering between static and shadow. Later, when Sam dared to review the footage, he found a single frozen frame, the silhouette of the antlered figure, caught just as it stepped onto the road. It was the only proof he'd ever have. The headlights caught glimpses of the watcher in the mirrors, those eyes, always watching, never blinking. By the time Sam broke free of the forest, dawn was creeping over the horizon. His truck was found idling at the edge of the woods, Long claw marks gouged down the side of the trailer, as if something had tried to tear its way inside. Sam never spoke about how the night ended, and he never drove through the Ozarks again. The nightmares stayed with him, always the same red eyes, always the sense that he was being marked. They say the Watcher still roams the Ozark woods, guarding its territory and leaving scars on those who cross its path. For Sam, the encounter became a warning, a reminder that not everything left behind on a haunted highway is as simple as a story or a rumor. Sometimes it's something you find waiting in your cab, quiet and impossible to explain. The story of the Blue Motel Key began on a quiet stretch of Interstate 70 near Salina, Kansas. Rebecca Sloan, known to other drivers as Becky, had pulled over for a quick break, stepping out to stretch her legs in the early evening. When she climbed back into her cab, she noticed something she hadn't seen before. An old-fashioned motel key, chipped blue paint, stamped with a faded number 6. It sat on her passenger seat, heavy and unfamiliar, pulsing faintly in the dim cab light, almost like a heartbeat. Becky stared at it, certain she'd left her cab empty, and felt a chill settle over her. Truckers had whispered about blue keys for years, calling them bad luck charms, omens for those who'd strayed too far from the familiar. She tried to brush it off, telling herself it was a lost trinket, but the key seemed to draw her eye again and again. The unease crept in quickly. As Becky drove east, her dashboard clock wavered, the green numbers spinning backward until they landed on 4:44 a.m., even though the sky outside still held the last colors of dusk. Her phone lost its signal, the time on the screen refusing to match the world outside. The air in the cab grew heavier, thick with the sense of being watched. The farther she went, the more it felt like the road itself was closing in, each mile stretching longer than the last. She started to check the passenger seat compulsively, half expecting to see someone, or something, reaching for the key. Night settled over the Kansas plains, and Becky's mind drifted in and out of focus. She blinked and saw neon lights ahead, a cluster of flickering signs that hadn't been there moments before. There was no memory of passing a billboard or spotting an exit, just the sudden presence of a small motel, its vacancy sign buzzing under a street lamp. The lot was empty except for her truck. She stared at the faded motel name, unable to make it out, but she couldn't shake the urge to leave her cab. The world outside felt thinner, as if she'd stepped into a place where the rules had shifted. The blue key pulsed in her hand, cold and insistent. She stepped out, the gravel crunching under her boots, and the door clicked shut behind her. For a moment, Becky wandered the lot, looking for any sign of life. The motel's windows were caked with dirt, every door identical, each one promising shelter but offering only silence. She tried each handle, but every door brought her back to the same empty parking lot, her truck idling under the flickering light. The sense of being trapped grew with each turn, as if the motel existed outside of time, waiting for her to surrender. The next morning, Becky's truck was found idling in that deserted lot. The doors were locked from the inside, the cab untouched except for the blue motel key resting in the center of the dashboard. There was no sign of Becky, and no record of any motel at that spot in any directory or map. The lot itself looked abandoned in the daylight, as if nothing had been there for years. Truckers say the Blue Motel Key is a warning, an invitation to a place that doesn't exist on any route, and a reminder that not all objects left behind are harmless. Sometimes what you find on the road is only the beginning. For some, it's a voice in the static or a whisper in the dark, waiting just beyond the reach of your headlights. On the northern plains, U.S. Route 2 cuts through frozen prairie, a stretch of highway where the wind never seems to stop, and the world feels emptied out under a sliver of moonlight. Truckers call a certain part of this road the Static Mile. It's just a few miles long, but stories have grown around it. Stories about time slipping, radios howling with static, and travelers who never make it to the other side. Eric Dalton had heard the rumors. He'd even laughed them off until the night he found himself alone on that road just after midnight, snow thickening across the windshield and the hum of electricity in the air. Eric's radio had been quiet, tuned low to keep him company, when a sharp electric static erupted from the speakers. It crawled up his spine, making him flinch. He reached to turn the volume down, but the static faded, replaced by a child's voice. The words came slow and clear, as if each syllable was being weighed before it left the speaker. 4, 7, 9. The voice was small, deliberate, and wrong in a way Eric couldn't explain. Then it whispered his name, drawn out, uncertain, as if searching for the right way to say it. He froze. Truckers said the Static Mile was haunted by the family that vanished in a blizzard decades ago, and that sometimes their voices still echoed through the static, calling out to anyone who would listen. Trying to shake it off, Eric kept driving, but the road ahead changed. Headlights swept over a row of abandoned cars stretched across the lane, each one identical. Doors left open, interiors swallowed by shadow, frost painting the windows. The snow around them was untouched, as if no one had walked away. Eric slowed, heart pounding, and stepped out into the cold. Inside the nearest car, the seats were empty, untouched, as if waiting for someone who'd never arrive. The silence pressed in, broken only by the wind and the faint hiss of his radio. He hurried back to his rig, hands shaking. His GPS screen flickered, the map spinning before snapping back to the same spot. Eric tried to drive on, but no matter how many times he pressed forward, the same mile marker flashed by, the same abandoned cars appeared, and the same static filled the cab. The loop tightened around him. The child's voice returned, counting off new numbers, softer now, almost coaxing. Eric's breath fogged in the freezing air as he muttered, "What do you want?" The answer came in a whisper. His name, again and again until it blurred with the static. 3 days later, a snowplow driver spotted Eric's rig parked at the edge of the Static Mile. The cab door hung open, snow drifting in. No sign of Eric, just an icy handprint pressed into the steering wheel, fingers splayed as if reaching for one last chance to turn back. Sometimes the road itself seems to choose its victims, twisting the familiar into something unrecognizable. And when the map no longer makes sense, it's not always clear if the next detour will lead you home, or somewhere you were never meant to go. Patricia Monroe trusted her GPS the way most truckers trust a familiar map, never expecting it to lead her astray. After 15 years hauling cars across every kind of road, she'd learned to rely on technology, especially on the winding stretches of California's State Route 49. Gold Country's past weighed heavy on the land, marked by the boom and bust of the gold rush and stories of miners who never made it home. Pat had heard the local legends of spirits and unfinished business, but they stayed in the background, until the night her route took a turn she hadn't planned. It was October, and the air carried the first bite of autumn. The detour came without warning. Her GPS, calm as ever, instructed her to turn off onto a narrow side road. Locals said the crooked man could manipulate navigation devices, and for a moment, Pat remembered those warnings. Still, she followed the digital voice, figuring it was rerouting her around some unseen trouble. The road narrowed beneath an arch of ancient oaks, their twisted branches blotting out the last light, while the temperature in the cab dropped sharply, her breath fogging the glass. That's when she saw him. A figure stood just beyond the reach of her headlights, tall, impossibly thin, dressed in a black suit and a wide-brimmed hat that shadowed his face. He moved with a limp, one shoulder dipping, his gait uneven and unnatural. No matter how many turns Pat made, the crooked man always kept pace, gliding along the shoulder, never falling behind. The odometer spun backward, headlights flickered, and the radio hissed with static. The road wound deeper into the woods, each bend revealing more of the same. Crooked trees, broken pavement, and the crooked man's silhouette flickering in the mirrors. Pat's hands tightened on the wheel. The GPS screen froze, then spun, unable to find her position. Her phone lost all signal. Each mile felt stretched, the landscape repeating itself with no landmarks or signs, as if she'd slipped into a loop with no way out. The cold inside the cab grew sharper, and the crooked man's presence pressed closer. She tried to focus, searching for a logic to the detour, but the world outside the glass kept unraveling. When Pat's truck was found 2 days later, it was nose down in a shallow ravine off an unnamed road. The cab was colder than the air outside, mirrors fogged from within. Her logbook sat open on the passenger seat, filled with frantic sketches of the crooked man, his lopsided walk, his hat the impossible length of his arms, and cryptic equations, as if she'd been trying to solve the pattern of his movements, desperate to find a way back to the main road. The only other clue was the number 6, traced in frost across the inside of the windshield. Old-timers in gold country say the crooked man is a remnant of the gold rush, someone who bargained for fortune and got lost along the way. Now he waits for travelers who trust the wrong voice, leading them into endless detours from which there's no return. Pat's story is a warning. Sometimes, the road that seems safest is the one that's been waiting for you all along. Out on the highways, every region has its own legend, and every bridge or back road holds a secret. Some warnings come with a whisper in the static, others with a storm that changes everything. Rain hammered the Atchafalaya Basin Bridge in Louisiana, turning the June 2021 night into a blur of water and wind. Mick Turner eased his rig onto the narrow span, headlights swallowed by the downpour. 18 miles of concrete stretched over the flooded bayou, and even for someone used to rough weather, the bridge felt cut off from the world. Mick had heard stories from other truckers about strange figures on the shoulder, rigs that vanished without a trace, and the bridge's history of sorrow. He never gave them much thought. Schedules mattered more than superstition. Halfway across, lightning split the sky, lighting up the churning water below. Mick's wipers could barely keep up, and the world shrank to the reach of his beams. In one flash, he saw her. A woman soaked through, standing on the edge of the shoulder, white dress heavy with rain, hair plastered to her face. Her arm lifted in a slow, desperate wave. There were no cars, no reason for anyone to be there. Mick's gut twisted, but he slowed, drawn by the silent plea. He pulled over, heart pounding. The woman's form blurred in the rain, then vanished as if she'd slipped through the guardrail and into the water. Mick scanned the shoulder, but she was gone. Only the storm remained, battering the cab. Then, across his windshield, words formed in trembling, wet streaks. "Help me." The message lingered for a heartbeat, then faded, leaving nothing but the rain and his own reflection. A thick, sweet scent filled the cab. Lilies, heavy and overripe, the smell of funeral flowers left too long in the heat. Mick looked down at the water below. Ghostly lights drifted among the bridge pilings, weaving in and out of the shadows where, years ago, survivors had once seen wedding lilies tangled after a flood. The lights didn't move with the current. Instead, they circled in tight, unnatural patterns, glimmering beneath the surface as thunder rolled above. Mick forced himself to focus, hands locked on the wheel. He pushed the rig back into gear and drove on, refusing to look back. The legend of the drowned crossing had always been about more than just a ghost. They said a bride was swept away here in the 1950s, her wedding dress caught on the pilings, never found. Since then, truckers talked about the woman in the rain, about lilies and lights, and about the rigs discovered empty and waterlogged with lilies scattered on the dash, drivers gone, no sign of struggle. That night changed Mick. He never crossed the Atchafalaya after dark again. He told other drivers that some cries for help on that bridge lead only to silence and empty trucks, and that not every plea is meant to be answered. Stories like his don't fade from the road. They linger, waiting for the next traveler who thinks they know where every journey ends. A former rail engineer, George Big G. Franklin, never expected a steam whistle to call him back on an abandoned route. He'd spent decades guiding locomotives across mountain passes before trading steel rails for the open road. By the time he was hauling freight through the Cascades, most of the old tracks had faded into history, replaced by ribbons of highway and the steady hum of diesel engines. On a snowbound morning in the Cascades, George found himself alone. The world outside his windshield buried under heavy snowfall. The pine forests stood silent, muffled by drifts, and there was no sign of other travelers, just the steady crunch of his tires and the distant moan of wind. As he climbed higher into the pass, the isolation pressed in. The light was thin, dawn barely reaching through the clouds. That's when he heard it, a sharp metallic whistle cutting through the quiet. At first, George dismissed it as wind echoing through the pines, a trick of the storm. But the sound came again, this time clearer, carrying the unmistakable pitch of a steam locomotive. It was impossible. There hadn't been active rails here for years, and George knew every inch of the route. Still, the whistle grew louder, joined by the deep rhythmic chug of an engine and a vibration that seemed to settle into the bones of the road itself. Rounding a bend, George saw the impossible. A battered steam engine barreling straight across the asphalt, sparks and blue-white smoke trailing behind it. The train's wheels spun over the road, not rails, and its windows were streaked with frost. Faces pressed against the glass, pale, unfamiliar, watching him with an intensity that felt both mournful and expectant, as if they recognized him from another lifetime. The whistle's blast was so piercing it rattled the glass in his cab. George braked hard, but the locomotive never slowed, vanishing into the snow as suddenly as it had appeared, leaving the road empty and silent once more. George's truck was found days later, parked neatly on the remnants of an old railbed deep in the Cascades. The engine idled in the cold, cab door locked from the inside. There was no sign of George. On the passenger seat, investigators found a battered conductor's cap, and on the dash, a single yellowed train ticket stamped with 2 words, "One way." These were the only clues left behind. Locals said the Iron Whistle, the ghost train of the Cascades, still roams the mountains, searching for those drawn to unfinished journeys. Some believe those who hear its call vanish, their trucks left behind as silent witnesses, a ticket marking their passage. The mountains keep their secrets, and the open road has a way of crossing paths with the past. Sometimes it's a whistle in the snow. Other times, it's a figure glimpsed where the wildflowers press close to the shoulder, a presence that lingers just beyond the reach of the morning light. Jessica Lane knew FM 390 as well as any back road in Texas. The route wound through fields of bluebonnets that seemed to stretch forever, their petals shining with dew on quiet April mornings. Locals always spoke of the road's beauty, but in spring, their warnings grew sharper. "The fields remember," they'd say, and in their voices was something more than nostalgia. Jessica never thought much about it, until the morning everything changed. It was 4:20 a.m. when she made her last run down FM 390, the sky paling behind her, bluebonnets rippling on both sides of the blacktop. The world felt hushed, the only sound the steady hum of her engine and the faint click of the tires over the seams in the road. As she rounded a gentle curve, Jessica saw a figure up ahead, at first just a pale shimmer drifting among the flowers. She slowed, squinting through the glass, and the shape resolved into a woman in a flowing veil, her dress trailing through the bluebonnets. With every step, the figure scattered petals, leaving a trail that hovered in the air before dissolving into mist. Jessica's hand hovered over her CB, but before she could call for another trucker, her radio crackled to life. A lullaby drifted through the static, soft and impossibly sad, sung in a language she couldn't place. The melody seemed to fill the cab, pressing in around her, and the scent of bluebonnets grew thick and sweet, flooding the air despite the windows being closed tight. Jessica's breath caught as the veiled woman turned, eyes fixed on the truck. For a moment, their gazes met. Then the figure faded, leaving only petals spinning slowly in the morning air. Shaken, Jessica pulled over at the next wide shoulder, the engine idling as she tried to steady her hands. The scent of bluebonnets was overwhelming, heavy and clinging. She stepped out to check her trailer. Inside, the floor was littered with wilted flowers, bluebonnets drained of color, their once bright blues faded to gray. When she climbed back into the cab, she found a single pressed bluebonnet resting squarely on the driver's seat, perfectly preserved, as if it had been left for her alone. Jessica's truck was discovered at dawn, parked neatly at the edge of a bluebonnet field. The cab was empty, the seat dusted with petals, and a solitary pressed flower left on the dash. Locals said the bluebonnet veil wanders the fields in spring, searching for what was lost, scattering petals for the missing. They warned that those who see her sometimes vanish, their stories folded into the land like the flowers themselves. Even after the sun rose and the sky cleared, the scent of bluebonnets lingered in Jessica's cab, a trace that could not be washed away. Some roads in America hold more than the memory of those who travel them. They gather the unfinished stories, the warnings, and the tragedies, carrying them forward with every new mile. Across these stories, the Highway 50 convoy, the fog-bound bride, the iron whistle, and the bluebonnet veil, a pattern emerges. These aren't random hauntings, but entities bound to the roads where their stories ended, replaying moments that never found resolution. The highways become more than routes. They serve as stages where unfinished business and old tragedies play out, drawing in those who pass by. If you've ever experienced something strange on the road, or heard a story that stayed with you, share it in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe for more verified folklore and real accounts from America's haunted highways. Which of these unfinished journeys haunts you most?